to the Overplayed podcast, the home of sports gaming in your ear every single Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. My name is GoodGameBro, the gentleman with the well-sculpted facial hair, and the other individual, my co-host, is he'll be at a mall near you come this December playing Santa. Mills, how are you?
So I have a little bit of gray in my beard again, and this is what I get is
Yes.
Santa. So we're clear, it's almost every Thursday. It's most Thursdays when you decide it's not beneath you to show up and talk to me like friends used to, and now I'm just sort of that internet acquaintance that you deal with once a week. I like that.
I hate talking to you
where
personally.
I'm aware. I'm fully aware that you do not like interacting with me. So we're clear. But we're gonna a lot of interacting packed show tonight. But first, I need to know this week, what have you been doing? I see, because I ask you because I care. I ask you because I actually give a damn what you do with your life. I want to see you on the uptick. I don't want to see you in the down lows like your rare drop fantasy football team.
You spent all week on that joke. Anyways, I spent a decent amount of time in your stream. I was watching the Madden 22 scouting update, which we'll obviously talk about here in a little bit as well.
Yes, sir.
I've been tinkering with that on my own. But this weekend, I watched the Tyson Fury Deontay Wilder fight, and I actually ended my stream early to go watch it because I was kind of like, let me just sort of see like what's happening, right? I didn't think it was going to be good. I thought it was going to be a 3-4 round fight and it'll be sort of over, either by Fury winning or Wilder winning. I could have seen it either way at that point.
Right.
I will say that like Deontay Wilder has improved in a lot of ways. He has also not improved in a lot of ways too. Like he still has like a neck that is, it looks like he's wearing like a neck brace when he's fighting. Like his head does not move at all. That dude still has some of the nastiest punching power, I think, on the planet right now. The heart that dude showed in the last 6-7 rounds of that fight, the fact that he did not go down, the fact that dude was fighting on jelly legs and was taking punch after punch and then somehow still knocked down Tyson Fury twice. He gets all the respect in the world. 50 stamina, 99 heart. That's what I give that dude after watching that.
He was out on his feet for a large portion of that fight. And I think watching that fight, I feel like Fury backed off a little bit because Fury knows what Wilder has. Like even on jelly legs, Wilder could take one shot and knock Fury down. So Fury was smart. I think this was one of Fury's better fights in terms of just, waiting for his time. It was a very smart fight. I love Deontay Wilder. I mean, I've met Deontay Wilder before in a basement in Cleveland. I actually played MLB against him. Just saying. But even then, I love the way he fights normally. It felt like he didn't have a strategy coming into this fight. It felt like he went out there saying, my strategy is going to be, I'm going to wait to land a right hand, and when it lands, the fight's going to end. I didn't see any. He wasn't like he was working towards anything. And you know what they say. Strategy is always good to get hit in the face.
Sure.
I mean, that very well could have been part of the problem. Is you're on jelly legs. You can only do so much. You're sitting. He was literally stumbling a lot of this match. And you're right. Respect to him for getting through and actually knocking Fury down a couple times. But it was clear. It was crystal clear that Tyson Fury is the better fighter right now. I hate to say that because, like I said, I actually picked Wilder to win this fight. I thought Wilder was going to knock Fury out. Same way you said, I didn't think it was going to go as long as it did. Yeah, man, Fury just looked like he knew what he wanted to do. He imposed his will on Wilder and just picked his shots and waited until he needed to.
I think Wilder still did way better than maybe people are giving him credit for, though. Like you look at the judges' cards, I think it was Fury +2. And that's like, to me, that shows that like Wilder had a lot of rounds where he was doing a couple things that Wilder's didn't do right. He was rotating to the strong side of Tyson Fury pretty much the entire time, which is why that jab and that nasty hook kept catching him. Yep. And then he literally didn't move his head. Like that dude's head was just like, he had Davis Mills' neck. That head was just literally straight and narrow, not moving at all of his body. But I just don't know who Fury fights from here. And so I feel like we're going to end up seeing Wilder Fury one more time. I don't think it'll be in the next year. I think we're looking probably 2-3 years out from now. That fight will resurface at some point. But it just felt good to see a heavyweight fight again that like I actually cared about the outcome.
Right. Especially a heavyweight boxing fight. Like, I mean,
Yep.
obviously heavyweight UFC fights are always fun to watch, but a heavyweight boxing fight that the mainstream media cared about, which is something we don't get a lot of these days. Um, I will say this, I'm on the other side of this. I actually hope they don't fight again. I want this to be, the end of the trilogy. I say this a lot of times because it's one of my favorite trilogy of fights of all time, and that was Gotti Ward. Arturo Gotti and Mickey Ward had a trilogy of fights, and the conversation did come up for them to fight a fourth time, and they didn't. And I'm glad because neither one of them was particularly a good technical fighter. They were just entertaining because they went out there as gladiators. I didn't want to see that again. I thought I
Sure.
saw enough. And I'm the same way with Fury Wilder right now. I've seen it enough. I've seen enough of it to where it'll make money for sure. It would absolutely make money if they went a fourth, especially like you said, if they wait a year or so. But honestly, let it sit. Let it sit as one of the better trilogies in boxing history. And let Fury, again, I don't know who he's going to fight at this point. One of boxing's biggest problems is they don't have that many names to fight. And Fury's a name fighter now. You hear Tyson Fury. I mean, the dude went to WrestleMania. I mean, it's the same idea. Dave, if you don't have a name to put against him, you got to find somebody. You got to build somebody up. As for Wilder, I think Wilder's going to be okay. Obviously, Fury's biggest problem is not having an opponent. Wilder's biggest problem is going to be building himself back up to let that that legacy of he was a top boxer, top heavyweight boxer. I want to remember that about Deontay Wilder. After that fight with Fury, there is a question mark in my head whether Wilder is as good as we thought he was.
Fair points. Fair points.
Yeah. Speaking about, let's get into sports gaming. We've got our Madden 22 biggest day for franchise gamers, bar none. The scouting update, which was delayed from September until October, dropped on Tuesday, October 12th. We have both had a chance to dig our hands into it. I actually started a brand new franchise on the stream with the Philadelphia Eagles. Spoiler alert, Jalen Hurts is not as good in game as he probably is for fantasy owners. That being said, give me some of your initial impressions. For those of you that don't know, the scouting actually revamped the way scouting works. You now have regional scouts, a national scout, and an entirely new schedule. And you don't go like scouting points for each individual person. You literally scout everybody. You scout everybody and focus on positions, regions, and then at some point you can bring in private workouts. So give me your initial impressions when you sat down with it and you were like, okay, what do I do here?
I'm going to say this. I tweeted out earlier the day that we're recording, obviously, so Wednesday night, but this is the best thing that Madden has added in 5-ish years. I'm not saying to franchise because it's one of the only things that's been added to franchise in some sense, if we're being fair. Franchise obviously did a lot more this year, but outside of this year, this is one of the best things that has happened to Madden as a game in a very long time. Franchise mode, for the longest time when you were playing through it and you're doing your scouting, it was super easy to figure out who some of the top players were. It was very easy to get a king's ransom in every single draft. And you just felt like after a couple of years, your franchise was stale because you built that team up so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
You dominated so well. This is changing that immensely. I watched a little bit of your stream, obviously, that you're doing. I think you had what was it? Was it 40? No, was it 49ers? It was a different team. No, the Lions.
So this one was, we were doing the Lions as a tester, going through to see how like the CPU would treat things, how the user got a chance to treat things. Yeah, it was Lions first. Then we started our, obviously Eagles one is going to be the franchise I run with for a while.
Exactly. So I watched a little bit of yours when I was going through my day, just trying to figure out like, okay, what are some of the things that like you can do to help me understand? And so that was really helpful. When I dove through my own, I had this feeling of like, I really don't know. And so I'm going through and I'm trying to scout people and I'm like, oh my God, like, do I really want to have a scout that's scouting wide receivers in, the Southeast, or do I want to focus more like the West Coast for like those Pac-12 guys or whatever? Like really, I want to make sure like if I go to the Southeast for wide receivers, like I'm missing out some of those really good defensive players I could be focusing a little bit more time on, from whether it's a defensive line or linebackers or whatever that might be. And I was finding myself like overwhelmed by like, where do I put my strategy? I can't just do everything that I did before and have this blanket sort of overview. I have to be intelligent when I'm scouting. When I find a gem, I'm coveting them, because now I'm like, okay, when I get to the point, I think it's like week 11, whenever we can start doing your private scouting of like the super focused scouting or whatever it essentially is, when I got to that point, I'm like, oh my God, do I do that? Like, I think this is a really good player, but if I do that, they might move up the draft board. And if they go past where I'm, another team starts to value them, I might lose this player. And the meta game that starts to work in your brain, and we talk about all the time, this story that you start to create with that
Mhm.
makes me so happy. And I just want to, build a little statue of Swami and just say thank you, Andre, for, pushing for this feature so long.
I will say this. It is, and the largest complaint has also been the largest compliment, is that a lot of people are stating they feel like they don't have as much control as they did before. And I'm going to agree. I'm going to agree there. Before, you could get everything you needed to get off of what? 5, 10, 15, 25 scouting points. That was all the information you were ever going to get on anybody is 25 scouting points, and you got 175 of those a week. Now, week one, you have to set where your scouts are going to go. And for those of you that haven't played with it yet, every region, there are 4 regions in the National. The National has a 3 strongest positions for the draft and a 3 weakest. And then each region, Northeast, Southeast, Central, and West, has a 3 strongest positions and 3 weakest. And you get 3 tier 1 scouts, 1 tier 2 scout, and 1 tier 3 scout, tier 3 being the strongest and where you get the most positive from. There is a large conversation going on right now whether you want your tier 3 scout to be a national scout and let them affect a more broad network, or if you want to focus, because if you hyper focus them in a region, you get more out of that region. Whereas the national will give you more on a wider span. You can expand your target, but you're going to get less. Let's say you put a tier 3 into a region, right? Instead of 40%, you'll have them at like 60 or 65 for that entire region. But if you put them on the national level, your national level goes from like 20 to like 40%, which is massive when you're looking at 5th, 6th, 7th rounders. So you have to know what your draft capital is. You have to know where your picks are. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to know what the class looks like in week one. By the way, even though you can hire and fire your scouts and place them in the preseason, wait until week one to do that. Because if you wait until week one, you can see the class and then assign your scouts appropriately. Once you do that, the regional scouts are locked in. You don't get to move them around because you see another scout. You have to literally just favorite that person, then just think to yourself, okay, I got to remember this guy. And then when the private workouts come out, go, okay, I'm going to private workout this guy. It's amazing. I felt when I was doing this with the Lions tester, I felt more immersed in having to worry about the entire class. And it's 100% more challenging. It's more hands-off, but that's what makes it more challenging. Like I think week 7 to 11, you're not even looking, you can look at the players, but you're not moving anything around. You can't. Your decisions mean so much more. And then when you finally do strike gold with somebody, like you said, you're like, okay, I want to keep this as close to the vest as possible. But the board isn't your board. The board is the national board. So like if a story comes out about that player, if that player wins the Heisman, I had players with a green trend on them, like 100 spots in the draft because they got a draft story, or because I brought somebody in for a workout and they had a really good workout. I saw that player go from like 3rd round to bottom 1st.
I saw a guy get kicked off USC. They kicked him off for being ineligible for grades. And I was like, what? I was loving this dude. And so now do I go for him?
Right. So that's the awesome thing is there's a lot more news stories. The stories mean more both positively and negatively. And they don't just mean something to you anymore. They mean something to the entire class. I will say with the positive comes the negative. Draft AI is still a little wonky. I had the Chargers with the 4th overall pick a quarterback. Now, that might be because Herbert wasn't performing. So that's another thing. It's like, well, Herbert wasn't that good. Maybe they do want to move away from him. So, but the mock drafts, have we even mentioned the mock drafts?
So good.
There are 5 mock drafts throughout the year, which will tell you not only where you're picking, but everybody else and what they're looking at in the first round. So I think you said this on your Twitter earlier. I'd love to see that personalized. I would love to see like a Mel Kiper or Todd McShay or anybody. Just give me somebody. Use that ESPN license you have and like throw personalities in there and be like, this is the McShay draft and this is this. Yeah, I would love to see that.
Yep. No, I agree. And imagine if like in the future, Madden 20, whatever, what is it, 22 now? So 23 or 24, like whatever that may
Mhm.
essentially be. Imagine if in your franchise, your quarterback has a couple of bad weeks and then you go into a press conference and the engine they have about like asking you different questions about your player's performance or how your player's doing, or if you have confidence in them. And what if you say you're sort of wishy-washy, right? You don't have confidence on them. And then you look at the next mock draft that comes out and Mel Kiper's like, they've got to draft a quarterback. They don't, he
Yep.
doesn't believe in the quarterback that he has, or they have to go QB in round one. All of a sudden, other teams are like, oh shoot, we have to then value quarterbacks more because this team that's controlled by Mills that hasn't won a single game the entire season, we now have to, know that they're going to probably draft a quarterback. Like there's so many different things they can do off of this. And so to me, with this scouting update that came through, it really feels like Madden has all of the pieces in franchise, not all the pieces, but has a lot of the foundational elements that I think we've wanted to really build out like a fully fleshed campaign. That again, we talk about story all the time in sports games,
Yep.
like to really tell that story. There are some UI things that like I don't love, right? Like I think you have to dive a little too deep. Like there's some topical information I wish was there. Like when you're doing pro days and NFL combine, like all that stuff, or even when you're just looking at players in general, like I wish the 40-yard dash or some of their bench press reps, if they're an offensive lineman, were like on that sort of topical card that you sort of first see.
Yep.
It sucks when you're going through like 30, 40, 50 players in a week and you're like, bro, I got to scroll in, I got to click over. Like, I think they'll get there over time. But the information that's there in the foundation, the scouting update is set, has me beyond hyped right now.
I will say this as well. Like you said with the combine, the combine is too deep right now. Before you used to get a combine score, and it would the combine score would at least be on the main menu of roster prospects. Now they've added not only a combine on the free agency round 2, but there's also a combine on free agency round 3 on like timeline wise, or I mean a pro day, and it's the same numbers, but they could be different. You have to literally click on a prospect, go into the card, push RB once to get to those numbers. I wish that those numbers showed somewhere else a little higher on the menu, because again, you're looking at 250 prospects per draft, and you're looking them, and draft combine is a huge number. Like it's those are huge raw stats that you want to know as you're getting into the draft. I will say this also. I have a challenge for everybody out there. Do all of your research before the draft, before you get into the NFL draft, and leave the timer on. Um, a lot of us pause the timer because we want to see what trades we have, and the challenge I have is, and this is to make this more immersive. Do all of your research, put it on a notepad, computer, whatever you have around you, and then literally leave the timer on, which is like a minute and a half or 2 minutes between picks, and see how chaotic you become when you're looking through all of your notes, all of the things you want to look for, your favorites board, your draft board, the media draft board, what everyone else has picked. The mock drafts, you're looking at them going, okay, well, this guy might pick here. This might hold off. This guy's fallen from a projected 1-2, but I've only got 40% scouting on him. So I know some of his traits, but I don't know all of his traits. This guy skipped the combine. Like all of those things make for a more chaotic and again, I'm going to use the word immersive experience.
Yeah, I really wish, speaking of that, that the mock draft, like, how when you're watching the real NFL draft, for example, and they have like Kuiper's projected picks. And maybe they'll do this if they ever get to the personality level, but like Kuiper's top 5 or Kuiper's top 20 or McShay's top whatever, Jeremiah's whatever. I would love to see that incorporated in here. Like even having that as a scrolling thing in the bottom or a rotating thing that sort of comes through, allowing you to sort of like, I wish you could also flag certain things for your players too. So like if you could have, you can sort of favorite your players or whatever, but I wish you could favorite and then go like a level deeper too, to say like this player is favorited, but then you have like cautiously optimistic on like character. Like you could flag a certain thing about like throw power, like favorite, and then have like throw power as an option, like favorite and be like character concerns, favorite, block shedding, whatever that might essentially be. Attach one of those singular things to that player when you favorite it, so like, oh, this is why I love them. I could love them in general, or I could love them for a very specific thing, because those top guys, you're going to remember them. But the late rounds, I'm like, why did I favorite like this guy again? The clock's ticking down. I'm panicking a little bit.
Right.
But again, I have faith they'll get there, seeing how well they've done with the scouting update, but it'll take time.
Yep, and I guess I think the next thing that I really want to see in this in franchise, if we're going to talk about like what the next step they could take, really want to see a personality morale system with like signing free agents. Free agency in general
Amen.
and the trade system needs to be rebooted. But I'd really like to see, and I know holdouts are kind of iffy because the NFL doesn't really like certain things. There are for what it's worth, sports games are bound by what the sport they develop for. The organization, like the NHL for NHL 22 or the NBA for NBA 2K22. That's why you'll never see fighting in these games because the sport, well, besides NHL, the sport won't allow them to do that. Same thing for like MLB The Show. So I really hope we see in terms of Madden things like morale going down if like a star wide receiver that has like a prima donna kind of like personality, if you're not targeting them enough, like you don't even catch the ball, even if you're just not targeting them enough. I would love to see those type of things make their way into Madden, maybe 23, 24.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think about that same scenario you're talking about, but think about what happened with the Packers and Aaron Rodgers, right? Like,
Mhm.
Madden already has it where players can retire early, right? They're not
Yep.
feeling it or whatever. I forgot the like verbiage they essentially use there, but imagine if you're Pittsburgh Steelers, right? I want Big Ben up out of there so bad, and so imagine if I took over the Steelers year one. I go draft another player, and Big Ben's like, "Well, I'm not really feeling it." I'm like, "See you, pack your bags. I don't care where you go. You gotta get up out of here." Those things would be really cool because again, maybe some players are cool, calm, and collected, and they don't care if you draft competition. That inspires them, right? Maybe some players are very worrisome about their job, and they're like, "This is going to make me perform worse or less." It's the same thing when you think about NCAA football 14. You could promise a player that if they come there, they'll have a starting job, right? Or they'll get playing time year one. And if you break that promise or do something to impact that player would leave. It's a similar mechanic. I would hope that we could see that eventually. But yeah, player morale, player personalities, all that stuff. I think if we're talking about sports and what really drives stuff happening, that has to be something they look at some point soon.
Yeah. I I just think I really, really hope, and I'm saying this with such cautious optimism, with a little bit of that real worry. I hope this isn't a 1 year thing. I really they've made so many positive steps forward. By the way, for those of you that were worried about progressive fatigue was fixed in this patch as well as a bunch of zone fixes that I'm confirming with a lot of people. The zone fixes were very, very good for hard flats and curl flats. I hope this isn't a 1 year thing to appease franchise people and then to move on. I hope they really set their feet in the sand and really push forward with more things for franchise. And I'm not asking for them to reinvent the wheel and everything, but like I said, there are way more opportunities now for franchise to continue to get better. And it's been a positive sentiment for franchise to see these upgrades, the weekly strategy screen, the fatigue, the practice, with the way practice is now with like half pads or starters, backups, who's getting the reps, practice injuries. I think the CPU gameplay this year is significantly better. There are still some holes there in terms of like end of the game or end of half time management, which has been forever. But I mean, I just really hope they continue to go forward with this and don't go, hey, man, we did a great job. Let's move on.
Yep. To me, sentiment means a lot for them. I'm sure after having fixed meta franchise trending and that being a nightmare for them from like
Yep.
a PR communication standpoint. But I really feel like the other part of it is sales, right? So you just got to cross your fingers that the game sold to some level that they're hoping for. So that way they can correlate, hopefully, that you fixed franchise and then people came back. But I still
Yep.
think franchise isn't something that people are going to come back for just after 1 year. It's going to take them having a couple of years of having a really strong franchise mode for people to truly believe. Because I think, to your point, people are going to be skeptical of, is it just a 1 year thing to appease and quiet the loud crowd that came, or are you committing to this long term? And I think if they are committing to it long term, football fans will then become Madden fans, where now
Absolutely.
that's been a big void I feel like they've had.
I really do. This is one of the ways I think they tried to bridge that mainstream gap with the yard, and I think the yard is a good way to bring in casual football fans, but people that consider themselves like armchair quarterbacks or like watch the game and maybe they don't know football as well as they think they do. Still, I would love, I think you're right. Continuing to do this offline, this realism, I think that really does bridge that gap. The one gap they still need to bridge is it's way too complex still.
Yep.
There's like cover 3 zone, cover 3 match, cover 4 palms, cover 3 sky. It's different than cover 3 buzz. It's just too hard right now for people. They've got to find a way to make that easier to understand on defensive and offensive play calls, but still maintain that level of control they give to like their hardcore and their competitive players.
Agreed. And you want to know how you can teach people about those different zone types and different ways to run defenses? Through franchise mode. You have a rookie, you're teaching them how to do it. You're a new head coach that joins the franchise. You're quizzing them about like, hey, how familiar are you with cover 2, cover 3? Your defensive coordinator can sort of explain that to you. There's some cool ways they could do that. It isn't the end all be all solution, but I think they could teach that through franchise mode.
Yep, I agree. So the Madden scouting update, do us a favor, on the podcast Twitter page or on either one of ours, Good Game Bro on Twitter or Mills Twitch on Twitter. It's Overplayed Pod on Twitter without the vowels, right? It's OVRPLYD pod on Twitter. Send us some feedback, man. GGB and I both have open lines to some of the devs and to some of the people that require that feedback. If you want to get your voice heard, man, you gotta be nice, be constructive, but you gotta open your mouth. They are actively, I will say this, I know this for a fact, they're actively looking for feedback for 23 right now. It's October. This is the time to give your feedback on the game if you want to see changes for 23, not March. March is when the game's already set in stone. So moving on, let's talk about, oh my God, the week in sports. Can we just, the roller coaster does not end in sports. Let's start with the biggest story of the week, I think bar none. John Gruden, they went back through a bunch of his emails that leaked out. This is emails from 10 years ago, and found racial slurs towards then NFLPA commissioner. What is it, commissioner or just the head of the NFLPA, Maurice Smith, regarding to him as having thick lips. There are some other things that went on. It's not just racism. There's misogyny in there. There is over-sexualization in there on a bunch of different emails. As a result for that, John Gruden has stepped down from the Raiders. Not only stepped down as head coach for the Raiders, he was removed from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers Ring of Honor after winning a Super Bowl with them. Is there a surprise at this point?
I don't think I'm overly surprised. I think Gruden is one of those guys that's always been sort of like the media darling personality type thing. ESPN has, they were building segments around him. They were building like mini series around him. They were doing a lot of things. And like whenever someone is too overly positive in a media spotlight, I always start to think like there's something, right? Like you just have that like weird inkling of like there's something that just feels like off, right? Like no one can be 100% on in this particular way nonstop. And because you see the tirades and stuff on the sideline, all head coaches do that. But you're like, if you've been around football in particular, there's always been this subculture, right? That has what we're essentially seeing with John Gruden is something that has been around in football for an incredibly long time, and it's terrible, right? Like, so I'm not surprised that this came to light. Slightly surprised it was Gruden, but also not surprised. But like to me, I think what's frustrating is you see the initial thing about what he said about Mr. Smith, and then he goes from his apology just didn't really feel like genuine. It was sort of like, oh, I'm frustrated about talking about this. It was a decade ago type thing. I'm so sorry. And then he was saying things like, I didn't mean anyone any harm. You can't say the things that he was saying in those emails and follow it up in your apology by saying, I didn't mean anyone any harm. That's not what that is. That is a cognitive misunderstanding of what you're essentially saying and doing and the repercussions that essentially has to other people, right? That is someone that has been in a privileged spotlight to not know how those words feel or how those things being said about you essentially feel. And then not only that, to have those things said, but then to have them bubbled up into the spotlight. So the Gruden thing is, I don't think he's the only coach that has said and done this. I wouldn't be surprised if more comes out for this, but like you just look around the NFL and what's happened in recent years. It's wild. I'm really interested to see if anything comes out about Kaepernick, like Kaepernick being blackballed, his alleged lawsuit that he essentially has, which I think was ended up being settled. I would not be surprised if emails essentially leaked out about that at some point. Like it's just a terrible day for the NFL, and I feel bad for a lot of people. But I especially feel bad for Carl Nassib, who had a personal day today, the first openly gay player, I think, actually on a roster. Because I think Michael Sam technically
on an active roster, yeah.
Yeah, because Michael Sam was drafted, but he didn't essentially make the team. If I remember correctly, I think he was cut in preseason. But for Nassib, like I know they granted him a personal day today, but I just know he's going to be dealing with an insane amount of questions that are going to be insanely frustrating for him, and he's going to be made out to be a spokesperson. Maybe he wants to be the person that sort of takes that on, but not everyone needs to be able to take that on. The same way that I don't like that, all these media outlets are going to black players and saying when the thing happened about DeMaurice Smith, and they were saying, "What do you think?" It's not on just the people that were impacted to say, "Well, this is how I feel," right? Obviously, they feel terrible about it. You should be going to white players as well and saying, like, "Okay, how does this sort of like culture happen, right?" And start talking to like everyone. You shouldn't just target the people that are impacted and say, talk about how this makes you feel, because that's not fun for those people that are impacted in any way, shape, or form, regardless of what group they're in.
But they're going to be, you're right, they're going to be the targets. Especially like you said, I think Nassib is going to be a massive target because there was misogyny, but the thing was, there wasn't a whole lot of, they didn't find, I'm going to change this. They didn't find a whole lot of, homophobia or any homosexual slurs. But Nassib is the first openly gay NFL player in a massively alpha male ruled, the perception ruled sport. They're going to go right to him. And as you said, they're going to go to African-American players too, which is crazy. Like, ask everybody. I mean, I understand why they're not asking everybody, because I mean, what the hell what are you going to go to Josh Allen and go, hey, how have you felt about the racism? And but you know what? Those are the guys that should really be stepping up. They're Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, those kind of guys should be stepping up for their teammates and be like, this isn't right. We talk about this all the time. Like, yes, we should be thrusting black players into the spotlight for the right reasons, not because something went wrong. And there have been a lot of white players that have done this, but like the leaders in this sport need to step up and say, this isn't right. What John Gruden did is not right, and we're not going to stand for it anymore. Because I'm going to tell you right now, there are players in those locker rooms that have been in these situations, that have heard these terms. If Gruden's doing this in emails 10 years ago, zero chance he has not interacted with players the same way. There are players that know this. I think Keyshawn Johnson was brought up as being said something about that. Antonio Brown said he experienced it. There were a few other players the same way. You know who I didn't hear about how they experienced John Gruden's wrath? I didn't see one white player say, oh yeah, I heard John Gruden say this. And damn well someone did. And They're just sitting back and saying, no, it's okay. It's time to step up. Like, it's time to step up for your teammates, for your brothers, for your family, because that's what football teams, we always preach how much of a family we are around here, right? It's a family atmosphere. Start to act like it. It's about time that you want to show some solidarity. Speak up for people against John Gruden, or as you know, it's deeper than John Gruden. 100%. He is going to get thrown in the albatross, guaranteed. But if they don't continue to dig further, that is the real problem here. The real problem is if they don't go further than this and go, okay, it's time to take it all out.
Agreed. To me, I'm also frustrated by like the lack of accountability that Mark Davis showed, the owner of the Las Vegas Raiders. Yeah. He said essentially, I don't know. The NFL has all the answers. Is essentially like what he said. I'm lightly paraphrasing here. I'm not heavily paraphrasing. He essentially said the NFL has all the answers. Like, essentially, go ask them. You are the owner of an organization. You should be speaking out about it, about how you're not a fan of that, how that has no place in your organization.
Right.
Even if you were just an idiot and you were thinking about it from a business sense, like, what are players going to think about coming to your organization if you can't even speak out against it at that point? Like, that to me is just rub me wrong. But I'm also thinking, like, ESPN is getting away scot-free in this situation? Was John Gruden not an employee of ESPN during essentially the entirety of this time when he was sending out these emails?
Mm-hmm.
How is ESPN not taking any blame, any accountability in this entire scenario? That to me is wild that ESPN has not been held to a higher standard than what they essentially are right now. So I'm floored by that. There's only one person that's happy in this entire situation, and it's Urban Meyer, because the
Urban
NFL,
Meyer.
everyone's not talking about him right now.
No one gives a care about Urban Meyer until he loses his next 3 games. And well, actually, he's got a good chance this weekend. So, but you talk about ESPN. Let's move on to another story highlighting an ESPN employee. It came out earlier today as we record this that Adam Schefter, this is again emails leaked in 2011. I got a real feeling that this email leak thing is going to go way deeper than what we're hearing about right now. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. But Adam Schefter was talking to Bruce Smith about. Let me see. I want to double check the story real quick before I go nuts here. In regards to, he referred to him as Mr. Editor in this email and said, "Hey, I'm putting this story up tomorrow. I'm sending it to you. Are there any edits you want to make?" Now, the story here is that at the time, Adam Schefter was a journalist, and to send a story over to the GM, people can look at that and say, well, you're allowing your subject to change your story, to run your story, and to have an affectionate term like Mr. Editor, like that is a big thing. What do you think about this story with Adam Schefter? And again, this is now going on, and they've found other emails to where, it's been he's done this before. Adam Schefter allowing a GM to maybe alter the story that he's getting ready to put up the next day.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at it from a journalistic integrity standpoint, not great, right? It's not something that you should be proud of. It's something that would get you barred from a lot of places. And if he were still a journalist, quote unquote, at this point, he probably would have lost his job at whatever outlet he essentially would have been writing for at that point.
Right.
But I think if I'm looking at 10 years ago, I would imagine Schefter was probably trying to pivot, like a lot of journalists were at that time, to insider analyst type sort of roles. I would also say that this is not the only journalist in any media, any genre that does this, right? If people are getting inside sources, what they essentially are doing, first of all, why are you using your company email? You're an idiot if you're doing that. That's
right.
What you should not be doing. When people typically get sources, they essentially are giving them hey, here's what I'm essentially writing. Are you okay with these things? Is there anything that you essentially want removed? Because a lot of times the things they want removed are things that maybe tie that back to them as being that source, which then outs them and then gets them fired or something of that nature. And there's anything a journalist or an insider wants is to keep their sources protected so they can essentially use them going forward. I'm going to assume that's what Schefter was essentially doing here. And it's sort of like that handshake agreement of like, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, keeping that sort of thing flowing, because you're keeping that team, the Washington football team, the Washington racial slurs at the time, you're keeping them in a little bit more of a favorable light on some of those stories. You're giving them a positive spin. But to me, this is not great, but it isn't a major issue in my opinion.
Yeah, I said Bruce Smith. It's Bruce Allen was at the time. You're correct. This is my take on this. He's not a journalist. Okay. He's an insider. And even if he was a journalist at the time, I'm going to be real with everybody. And this is dealing with video game journalism. Okay. I'm going to make a very, very clear connection. When you're doing stories, the way you get connections and the way you get sources like that, you can do with stories one of two ways. You either write opinion columns, editorials, or you write stories, and the sources you have are from connections you've made out of trust. I even think that they addressed this in Ted Lasso in this season, to where the Trent Grimm from the Independent, spoiler alert for Ted Lasso season 2 if you haven't seen it. He even texts Ted the night before he is going to run a story about Ted having a panic attack at a massive soccer game. And he says flat out, he goes, "Do you have any comment? I wanted to warn you before this story was going to get written. that kind of thing. And I guarantee you, if that conversation goes further of Ted going, hey, can you alter this, this, and this? He works with them. That's how insiders become insiders. That's how you develop trust. Because what you're going to say is, I know what people are saying. Oh, well, if you have a story, you need to write that story. I mean, it's football, it's sports. If you want to write a story, you can say, hey, look, I'm going to write this story, but I'm going to give you the option here of saying, hey, look, is there anything like you said, anything you need me to take out so we don't get you involved in this? But the base story still has to come out. I think this is a non-story that gets blown out of proportion by people looking to take down a large celebrity. That's I'm sorry. I don't want to call it cancel culture because it's different than that. Because it's not like Schefter's doing what Gruden's doing. I think this is literally just people going, oh, Schefter's successful. Let's stop that. I think that's where this really was. If this wasn't a social media driven, opinionated world like that, I don't even think this is a story if it comes out.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like it's one of those things. It's a small anecdote, I think, from this entire email, breakout scandal, whatever you want to essentially call it. But to me, it's like you read it and you're like, is that somewhat unethical from a journalistic standpoint? Sure, but is it really a big deal? No, because it happens literally everywhere. You can use the same analogy, I guess, for the Gruden thing, but the Gruden thing is something that is very malicious and egregious in terms of how it sort of goes. Where this is just sort of a like scratching your back, you scratch mine. It's sort of a typical business practice you find in that.
If this Schefter story was, hey, I'm going to write about racism in the NFL, I can exclude you from this story if you'd like. Yep. That's completely different. Then, like I said, because that is a societal like issue that needs to be held accountable for that kind of stuff. Me saying, hey, I'm going to write this article about Bruce Smith being signed as your defensive end isn't that big a deal, I don't think. Talking about big deals, though, we talked about Kyrie last week. Kyrie, GM of the Brooklyn Nets. I still call them the New Jersey Nets all the time because I wear remember the old school like sky jerseys they used to have with the red lettering? I still wear that in my team. So, Sean Marks, the GM for the Brooklyn Nets, essentially came out and said, if Kyrie Irving cannot play for us full-time, he will not play for us part-time this is about his vaccination status, because if Kyrie were to play in the league and not be vaccinated, first of all, he can't play in Brooklyn because Brooklyn requires you to be vaccinated. He couldn't even travel to Toronto. Right, in Sanford, there are a ton of places where he literally cannot go, and the NBA's already cracked down. They said if you're caught unvaccinated and breaking curfew rules, you will be fully suspended and possibly expelled from the league for that season. But the real story here is Sean Marks putting a line in the sand and saying, hey, if Kyrie Irving cannot get vaccinated, essentially, and play for us on a full-time basis, then he will not play for us at all. I'm sure Sean Marks really wishes he knew this before he made the Sean Dinwiddie trade. But GGB, let me play devil's advocate for a second. But GGB, Kyrie made a choice. He should be allowed to make a choice to not get vaccinated, right? I hope you heard the sarcasm in my voice. That's the devil's advocate comment that I saw on Twitter.
Those comments always drive me nuts because my thing is I could choose to quit working or not work anymore, right? That's a choice that I'm making. But I would also then lose my house, lose my car, probably lose my wife. There's like a lot of things that essentially have for that, right? Your actions are actions, but they do not act in a silo, right? There are repercussions and consequences, and there are benefits to everything that you essentially do in your life. You are making calculated choices and decisions, and you have to live with the consequences or benefits that essentially come from that.
Right.
Good for almost the New Jersey Nets as well. Good for the Brooklyn Nets for doing something and saying like, look, we're not doing this like halfway you play, halfway you don't. We figure out what happens. Then you get in the postseason. Because people are going to say, well, why can't they just let him play some games? Sure. But then what happens when you get in the postseason?
Right.
Let's say you get matched up in the NBA Finals. It's the Brooklyn Nets. It's the Golden State Warriors. You can't play any of the games against the Golden State Warriors. So how fair is that to your team? You're also then dealing with the cohesion of like your unit, right? So Kyrie's going to play whether 82 games in NBA season, so 41 games out of the year he's going to play. How is he going to stay on top of his game? How are other players in the rotation going to be used to that? Basketball is a game of chemistry, like most sports, right? Chemistry is super important. When you're giving guys in and out of the lineup, some guys are playing more because Kyrie's not playing. It is just a nightmare, not just for the players, for the coaches, for the entire organization. Kyrie is making a choice, and he is plenty capable of making that choice and dealing with it, and he is. But I mean, they're doing the right thing of essentially telling him like, look, you're either in or you're out. You can't be halfway here. And he also is dealing with the repercussions of you're not going to get that $186 million extension that we were working towards at that point. Kyrie does and says a lot of things that are controversial, but some of them make a lot of sense, and some of them are challenging a lot of status quo things. And I think if you're asking a question, it should be thought provoking, it should be challenging, but should also be based in some level of reality.
Right.
One of my frustrations with Kyrie is that he's saying that he wants to be the voice of the voiceless. But he was that leaked out, like he had that leak out through an anonymous source. And you can't be the voice of the voiceless behind a veil. If you're going to be the voice of the voiceless, you need to be on a platform. You need to be doing that. And you need to have a strong stance that is not changing and blowing with the wind based off whatever article you essentially read that came from a .info based website. So I'm happy that the Brooklyn Nets are doing what they're doing. They're standing, they're making a stance, and this will probably be a general practice for the rest of the league. Kyrie can do what he wants to do, but so can the Brooklyn Nets, his employer.
Kyrie Irving doesn't play this season. Sean Marks has already said they're not going to offer him an extension after the season. So we may have seen, unless Kyrie has a massive change of heart, we may have seen Kyrie in his last game in the Nets. How does this affect, this is secondary, obviously, but how does this affect the Nets' chances this season? James Harden was asked about Kyrie not being there. And James Harden was pretty clear when he said, we've got two pretty awesome leaders still here. We'll be fine.
Yeah. Barring injury, the Brooklyn Nets are NBA world champions. I honestly like them better without Kyrie than I like them with Kyrie. James Harden is the second hardest player in the game. At worst, James Harden is a top 3 most difficult to guard player in the NBA. Do you know who the number 1 player is? It's Kevin Durant. Whatever Kevin Durant's middle name is, it's Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant, even now, coming off that nasty injury and the other injury from that, is still the most difficult offensive player to guard. I would say he's more difficult to guard than Giannis because Giannis, you can pack the paint. Kevin Durant doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who's guarding Kevin Durant. The only person to stop Kevin Durant is Kevin Durant. He's a 7-footer that is one of the top speed players in the league, has the best versatile jump shot package we have probably ever seen from a big man in NBA history. That team, barring injury, is NBA champions without Kyrie Irving.
This is a really good time to bring up that they signed Patty Mills in the offseason.
Yep.
Because Patty Mills, while he probably won't start at the 1, that's going to be James Harden's job. Thankfully, James Harden has proven in Houston that he can run the 1 and be a facilitator scorer as well. But they're going to have Harden, Harris, Durant. Remember, Aldridge is coming back. If he's fully healthy, I mean, with a year off on his legs, can you imagine just how much stronger he'll be? Blake Griffin showed last year that he still has a lot left in him as he's reinvented his game. Millsap is still there to eat minutes. James Johnson, Bruce Brown. They've got a good team, as you stated, without Kyrie to kind of like, I hate to say this, but it's a distraction. Kyrie, unfortunately, becomes more of a distraction with whatever team he's on. And I said last year that I thought that Kyrie, Durant, and Harden would work. I was wrong. Like, Irving legitimately is a massive problem wherever he goes. And now he's really starting to show that whole Irving, LeBron James problem where they were both at each other's throat. And, LeBron said it was Irving and Irving said it was LeBron. Funny. I don't hear anybody else in the league say that LeBron's the problem. But everyone that Kyrie has come across always seems to be like, man, we're okay without him. It's not a big deal. They don't always go, he's the problem, but no, we're good. We're good. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, I've been saying this for a long time. I've also said I think Kyrie. I think I said 3 or 4 years ago that Kyrie would be retired from the NBA within 5 years, and I think we're still
Yep.
going to hit that mark. I don't think he plays. I think there's a chance he plays in the NBA again
Someone will sign him.
if a
Someone will
vaccine
sign him.
mandate if a vaccine mandate is removed, or to your point, someone gambles on him, sure.
Yeah.
But I don't. He'll be very particular about where he plays and how often. But it's just, yeah, he's gone sooner rather than later.
Yep, agreed. Talking about players not playing for their teams, Ben Simmons, the saga continues. I don't want to make too much of this, but real quick, Ben Simmons showed up randomly in Philadelphia to get his vaccine. Was it a test or his vaccine? I'm not sure if he was getting the vaccine or getting tested for the vaccine, but the 76ers had no idea that he was showing up. He literally showed up at the arena the night of a preseason game and got tested. Like, what? So what is going on with Ben Simmons? He was pretty much okay getting fined as long as he was. Are the fines finally starting to hit home a little bit?
I don't think the fines are starting to hit. I think this is part of a mastermind thing, right? If you are Ben Simmons and you want a contender to trade for you, how do you best make sure that a contender is willing to trade for you? You go out there and you show that you're working in practice, because everyone's seen the jump shot. We know what Ben Simmons summers look like, right? Long jump shots, crazy footage, and then we never see that happen in an NBA highlight game.
Yeah.
I think Ben Simmons is showing that I'm still going to go to practice. I'm still going to be around my team and be a quote unquote good teammate, just to make sure that he can get traded to a contender, which is all that he wants. He does not want to go to NBA Siberia. He wants to be in a team that he can try to win and have a good market and all those different things. I don't think it's anything more than a calculated move by Ben Simmons' camp, which he has an agent that is very smart and his mastermind is some great things, if we want to be honest. I think that's all we're seeing from Ben Simmons here.
Doc Rivers is assuming Ben Simmons will be ready for the beginning of the season. That's obviously coach speak. That's Daryl Morey just being like, hey, dude, just like let this go. And then Simmons apparently passed his physical when he showed up. Does Ben Simmons play a regular season game for the 76ers? Yes or no?
Absolutely. I think we see 10 to 20 games for Ben Simmons in Philly, and then before he's gone. But I don't think he finishes the season in Philly.
He's got to show value. Right now, his value's low. I guarantee that in that short meeting, Daryl Morey was like, listen, dude, I'm not trading you right now. You show teams you can play. We'll get a package for you. I'll send you wherever the hell you want to go.
Yep.
I think that's probably, and that's at the very least, you can say what you want about demanding a trade. At the very least, that would be a show of maturity out of Ben Simmons to be like, okay, I got you. We'll work together to get me out of here. So good for them. Baseball, quick hits real quick. The Braves, the Red Sox, the Astros are all advancing. We're going to get the Red Sox and Astros this weekend. Dodgers, Giants, game 5 is happening. If you're listening to this on Thursday, it's happening tonight. It'll be Urias versus Logan Webb. Logan Webb pitched a gem in game 1 for San Francisco in a win. Urias actually pitched really well in game 2. Webb will have an extra day of rest on this. Actually, might be a little too much, a little bit more than a starting pitcher normally gets. I got you right here. The game is being played in San Francisco. All right. San Francisco won 107 games in the regular season. Los Angeles won 106. Can we start reseeding the playoffs already?
Once in a while, seriously.
Like, come on, man. There's no reason that we should have the 107 and 106 win teams playing each other in the first round, just so we're clear. Game 5, Dodgers, Giants. Who do you got?
I keep going back and forth. I'm going Giants. I feel like they're a team of destiny. That team should not have been anywhere near as good as what they've been this year. I got to go watch them play once this year, and I was blown away by just like the environment and how much fun they are. I'm going Giants in a close one, a 1-run game. Giants taking it home.
Giants, they both have split so far on the road and home. They're 1-1 in San Francisco, 1-1 in LA. I'm picking the Giants as well. I just feel like that the Giants are going to be able to get to Urias. I think Logan Webb is going to continue being hot. You're right, man. There's something about the Giants, man. It's not even even year. Remember the even year World Series run they had? It's not even an even year. It's something about them. I've been waiting for them to drop off. You know, the big thing was the big rivalry all year was San Diego and LA. Every time Tatis played and they traded for Scherzer, they brought in Trey Turner. Like, the Dodgers were just stacking up. The Giants were just sitting there going, they traded for Chris Bryant. They were just sitting there going, no, we got you. We got you. Don't worry. Ex-Oriole Kevin Gosman in the Cy Young race. I mean, there's just something about that team. Brandon Crawford playing like he's 10 years younger.
God. Yep.
Brandon Belt swinging the stick. Like it's been something else. And it's been an entire team network or effort for the Giants. I think the Giants pull it off. They'll see the good old Braves in the NLCS. We'll talk more baseball next week once we get through some of the NLCS, ALCS. Next week, we will go over our NBA previews. NBA season starts October 19th, so that'll be right as we're recording. We'll go over our favorites, who you think should be the MVP, why it's Ben Simmons, GGB, wherever he goes. Ben Simmons, MVP in Indiana. Can you imagine? Anyway, so wrap us up, brother.
All right, great episode. Again, if you have not yet, if you're on an Apple device and you're listening to the podcast, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. Helps out an absolute ton. Tell your friends about us. Tell your dog about us. Let your dog
share
listen.
the podcast. If you see it on Twitter, I see you folks on Twitter. Share the podcast.
Absolutely. Share the podcast. Follow the Twitter account so you can make sure you always get notifications for that. Make sure you type podcast, !podcast in both my stream and Mill's stream. So you can always make sure you get that little link for that. So you can always make sure you download it on your favorite mobile device. But we'll catch you guys next week as we make Mills feel inferior in basketball knowledge. Be safe, be smart, tell somebody you love them. We'll catch you guys in the next one.
Go Wizards! I'm a Wizards fan now. Ciao.
I hate it here.